They say a widow must eat the feast, or her husband's spirit will never rest. But what they don't tell you is what happens when you swallow that first bite. The red earth of Ibadan swallowed Chief Adeyemi's body on a Tuesday afternoon. His wife, Folake, stood silent as the drummers played their final song. The women of the village surrounded her, their faces painted with white clay, their voices rising in mourning songs that made the air itself feel heavy. But Folake did not cry. Her eyes stayed dry as dust, fixed on the fresh grave before her. The other women whispered among themselves, wondering, what kind of wife does not weep for her husband? They did not know that Folake had run out of tears 3 years ago, when Chief Adeyemi took his third wife and moved her into the compound. As the last handful of earth covered the grave, Mama Idowu, the eldest woman in the village, stepped forward. Her ancient fingers gripped Folake's wrist like iron. Tonight, she whispered, her breath smelling of bitter herbs, you will eat the feast, and you will eat every last grain. The compound felt different without Chief Adeyemi's booming voice, filling every corner. Folake walked through the courtyard where his other wives gathered in small groups, their eyes following her like hungry dogs. They had never liked her. She was the first wife, yes, but she had given the chief no sons, only one daughter, Bisola, who now lived in Lagos. The cooking pots still hung on the outdoor fire, blackened from years of use. Folake remembered when she first came here as a young bride, how the compound seemed so large, so full of promise. Now, it felt like a trap closing around her throat. The walls seemed to lean inward, the shadows growing longer, even though the sun had not yet set. She entered her hut and found the women already there, waiting. 7 of them, including Mama Idowu, sat in a half circle facing her sleeping mat. In the center of the circle sat a large clay pot, steam rising from it in thin, ghostly ribbons. The smell hit Folake like a slap. Bitter, rotten, wrong. Sit, Mama Idowu commanded, pointing to the mat. Folake's legs moved without her permission, carrying her to the center of the circle. The women began to chant in the old language, words that sounded more like hissing than singing, their voices wrapped around her like invisible chains. Mama Idowu lifted the lid from the pot. Inside was a thick, dark stew that seemed to move on its own, bubbling slowly even though it sat far from any fire. Folake's stomach turned. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The old woman smiled, showing teeth too white for someone her age. "This is the widow's feast," Mama Idowu said. "Your husband died with many words left unspoken, many debts left unpaid. This meal will bind his spirit so he can rest. But you must eat every drop, Folake, every single drop. If you refuse, his ghost will wander forever, and the village will suffer. Do you understand?" Folake nodded, though she understood nothing except that she was trapped. The wooden spoon felt heavy in Folake's hand. She dipped it into the pot, and the stew clung to it like thick mud. The women's chanting grew louder, their voices pressing against her ears until her head throbbed. She brought the spoon to her lips, and the smell made her gag. Rot and earth and something else, something that reminded her of the mortuary where they had prepared her husband's body. "Eat," Mama Idowu hissed. "Now." Folake closed her eyes and swallowed. The taste exploded in her mouth, bitter, burning, alive. It slithered down her throat like something with a will of its own. And suddenly, the hut spun around her. The walls breathed in and out. The women's faces stretched and twisted into shapes that shouldn't exist. When she opened her eyes again, everything looked normal. but the air felt different now, thicker somehow. And in the corner of the hut, just beyond the firelight, she saw a shadow that looked exactly like a man. A shadow wearing her dead husband's face. Folake's scream caught in her throat. The shadow moved, taking one step closer to the circle. None of the other women seemed to notice. They continued their chanting, their eyes closed, their bodies swaying. Only Mama Idowu watched her, and the old woman's smile grew wider. "You see him now?" Mama Idowu said softly. "Good. That means the feast is working. Eat more, Folake. You have only just begun." The shadow of Chief Adeyemi tilted his head, studying her like a hawk studies a mouse. Its mouth moved, forming words she couldn't hear over the chanting. Folake's hand shook as she dipped the spoon again. The stew seemed thicker now, harder to scoop. When she brought it to her mouth, she swore she felt something solid in it. Something that felt like a fingernail scraping against her teeth. She swallowed quickly, trying not to think, trying not to know. The second swallow brought memories. They crashed into her mind like waves. Chief Adeyemi on their wedding night, young and handsome, promising to love only her. Then, another memory. Him bringing home the second wife. His face cold as stone when Folake protested. Then the third wife. Then the beatings when she questioned him. But these weren't just her memories. Somehow, she could feel his memories too, sliding into her mind like snakes. She saw herself through his eyes, small, useless, barren. She felt his anger, his disappointment, his disgust. The emotions weren't hers, but they filled her up anyway, choking her from the inside. "Stop," she gasped, dropping the spoon. "I can't," but Mama Ido's hand shot out, faster than any old woman should move, and forced the spoon back into her grip. "You will eat," the old woman said, and her voice sounded like it came from the bottom of a well. "Or you will join him in the grave tonight." The other women's eyes snapped open all at once, and Folake saw they weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking through her, at something behind her. She turned slowly, even though every instinct screamed not to. The shadow of Chief Adeyemi had grown larger, darker, more solid. It towered over her now, and his face was no longer peaceful. Its mouth stretched open too wide, showing darkness instead of teeth. When he spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Eat, wife. Finish what you started." The temperature in the hut dropped so fast that Folake could see her breath. The fire dimmed to barely a flicker. Folake understood then. This wasn't just tradition. This was a trap. The feast wasn't binding her husband's spirit to rest. It was binding her to him forever. She looked at Mama Idowu and saw the truth in the old woman's eyes. "You knew," Folake whispered. "You all knew." Mama Idowu stood up, and suddenly, she seemed 10 feet tall. "Of course we knew," she said. "We have all fed the feast to someone, Folake. Every woman here. When my husband died, I fed it to his youngest sister. When Mama Chika's husband died, she fed it to her own daughter. The feast must have someone to bind to, someone to carry the spirit, and tonight, you are that someone." The other women nodded, their faces blank as masks. Folake's mind raced. This couldn't be real. This was madness. But the shadow of her husband was reaching for her now, its fingers long and wrong, and she could feel cold radiating from it like mist from a grave. "Why?" Folake asked. "Why me?" Mama Idowu laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Because you are the first wife. Because tradition demands it. Because we need someone to carry Chief Adeyemi's death. And you, my dear, are the most expendable." The words hit Folake like stones. Expendable. After 30 years of service, of silence, of suffering, expendable. Something changed in Folake then. The fear didn't leave, but it made room for something else. Anger, rage, the kind that had been building for decades, pressed down, ignored, swallowed like poison. She looked at the pot of stew, then at the women, then at her husband's shadow, and she made a choice. She picked up the pot. The women gasped. Mama Idowu's smile faltered. "What are you doing?" the old woman asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. Folake stood up, holding the pot against her chest, feeling its unnatural warmth seep through her wrapper. "You said I must eat every drop," Folake said quietly. "You said if I refuse, his spirit will wander and the village will suffer. But you didn't say what would happen if someone else ate it instead." Before anyone could stop her, Folake turned and threw the entire pot at Chief Adeyemi's shadow. The stew hit the shadow with a sound like thunder. The shadow screamed, a noise so terrible that all 7 women covered their ears and fell to their knees. The hut shook. The fire exploded into blue flames, and the shadow began to change, to twist, to break apart like smoke in wind. But it wasn't disappearing. It was multiplying. Where there had been one shadow, now there were dozens, hundreds, pouring out of the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Folake realized with horror that these were all the other spirits, all the husbands, the fathers, the brothers, who had been bound by the feast over the years. And now, they were all free. The spirits swarmed through the hut like angry bees. They had faces Folake didn't recognize. Men from generations past, all of them bound by the widow's feast, all of them hungry for justice, or revenge, or simply freedom. The 7 women screamed and tried to run, but the spirits blocked every exit. If you're gripped by Folake's story, show some love to JourneyTales Africa. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss the dark tales hidden in Africa's past. Now, let's see what happens next. Mama Idowu alone stood her ground, though her ancient hands trembled. She raised her arms and began chanting in the old language, trying to command the spirits back. But they didn't listen. They circled her like sharks, their whispers filling the air with accusations. "You trapped us. You bound us. You fed on our suffering." One spirit lunged at Mama Chika, passing through her body like ice water. The woman collapsed, her eyes rolling back, her mouth opening in a silent scream. Another spirit did the same to Mama Sade, then another. One by one, the women who had performed the widow's feast fell, their bodies convulsing as the spirits they had bound took their revenge. Folake stood frozen in the center of the chaos, untouched. The spirits swirled around her but never touched her, and she understood why. She hadn't finished the feast. She hadn't completed the binding. She was the only one in the room who was truly free. Mama Idowu's chanting grew desperate, frantic, but her voice cracked and failed. The elder spirit, a man with eyes like coal, floated before her. "You have done this 53 times, he said, his voice the sound of wind through dead trees. 53 women you have fed to us. 53 lives you have stolen. No more." The old woman fell to her knees. "I had no choice," she sobbed. "The tradition demanded it. The village required it. Without the binding, the spirits would have..." But the cold-eyed spirit cut her off. "Lies. All lies. You created this tradition, you and the elders, 50 years ago, when you needed someone to blame for the crops failing. You needed someone to carry your guilt." Folake's blood ran cold. It had all been a lie. There was no ancient tradition, just cruelty passed down, woman to woman, generation after generation. The widow's feast was never about binding spirits to rest. It was about binding women to silence, to suffering, to the grave. The spirits turned to Folake. She braced herself, expecting their anger, but the cold-eyed spirit only looked at her with something like sadness. "You broke the pot," he said. "You refused to swallow the lie. For that, you have freed us all. But freedom demands a price." "What price?" Folake whispered. The spirit gestured to the collapsed women around her. "They must pay for what they've done. But you must choose. You can leave this place. Forget everything. Live whatever life you have left. Or you can stay and bear witness. Tell the world what happened here. Speak the truth that has been buried for 50 years. Folake looked at Mama Idowu, now small and broken on the floor. She thought of all the women who had been fed the feast before her, all the silent graves, all the suffering disguised as tradition. And she thought of her daughter, Bisola, living free in Lagos, never knowing how close her mother had come to the same fate. "I will stay," Folake said. "I will bear witness." The cold-eyed spirit nodded slowly. "Then you will see everything. And you must remember it all." He touched her forehead with one translucent finger, and suddenly, Folake's mind filled with visions. She saw the first widow's feast 50 years ago in this very compound. She saw Mama Idowu as a young woman, feeding the poison stew to her husband's sister. She saw the sister's body buried in secret behind the compound wall. She saw feast after feast, woman after woman, decade after decade. The horror of it threatened to break her mind. But Folake held on. She watched every memory the spirit showed her, every name, every face, every grave. When it was over, she fell to her knees, weeping for all of them. The women who had been fed, and the women who had fed them, both victims, both trapped. The spirits turned their attention back to the 7 women on the floor. "They will live," the cold-eyed spirit said, "but they will never speak again. Their tongues will remember the taste of the feast forever, but no words will come. This is their punishment, to know the truth and be unable to spread the lie." One by one, the spirits entered the women's bodies one final time. When they emerged, each woman's mouth was sealed shut, as if their lips had been sewn with invisible thread. Their eyes were open but empty. They would live, yes, but not the lives they had known. Mama Idowu tried to scream, but no sound came out. She clawed at her mouth, her eyes swelled with terror. The cold-eyed spirit watched without pity. "You silenced so many," he said. "Now you will know what silence truly costs." The spirits began to fade, their forms growing thin as morning mist. But before they disappeared completely, they had one final act. The fire in the center of the hut roared to life, blue flames, leaping unnaturally high. The flames spread to the walls, the roof, consuming everything. "Run," the cold-eyed spirit told Folake. "This place must burn. All evidence of the feast must be destroyed. Only your testimony will remain." Folake stumbled out of the hut as the flames engulfed it. The other women crawled out behind her, silent, their faces blank with shock. She watched as the fire spread to the other huts in the compound. Chief Adeyemi's sleeping quarters, the cooking area, the storage rooms, everything burned with that strange blue fire that gave off no heat but consumed everything it touched. By dawn, nothing would be left but ash and memory. When the sun rose over Ibadan, the villagers came running to see the destruction. The compound of Chief Adeyemi was nothing but blackened earth and smoking ruins. Folake sat at the edge of it all. her wrapper torn, her face streaked with soot. The 7 women sat behind her, mute and staring. The village elders demanded answers. Folake told them everything about the widow's feast, about the tradition that was really murder, about the spirits trapped for generations. The elders called her mad. They said grief had broken her mind. But then they saw the 7 women, all of them unable to speak, and doubt crept into their eyes. Folake didn't argue. She simply repeated her story, again and again, to anyone who would listen. Some believed her, most didn't, but the story spread anyway, whispered from market to market, village to village. And slowly, very slowly, things began to change. 3 weeks later, Bisola arrived from Lagos. She found her mother living in a small room at the mission house, the only place that would take her in. Bisola had heard the stories, the wild tales about spirits and burning compounds, and women who could no longer speak. She expected to find her mother broken. Instead, she found Folake stronger than she had ever been. Thinner, yes. Older, certainly. But her eyes were clear, her voice steady. "Mama, what happened?" Bisola asked, taking her mother's hands. And Folake told her everything, from the first bite of the feast to the last spirit's warning. Bisola believed her. Not because the story was believable, but because she knew her mother had never lied in her life. And more than that, she recognized the look in Folake's eyes. It was the look of someone who had seen hell and walked back out, carrying the truth like a burning coal in her bare hands. Folake never returned to Chief Adeyemi's compound, even after the ruins were cleared. She stayed at the mission house and began to write every name she remembered, every woman who had been fed the feast, every spirit who had been trapped. It took her 3 years to finish, her handwriting growing shakier as her body weakened. The mission priest helped her make copies. They distributed them to churches, schools, women's groups across the region. Most people threw them away. Some laughed, but a few, a precious few, read them and believed. And they made sure their daughters knew. They made sure the tradition, if it existed anywhere else, would find no fertile ground. Bisola came to visit every month, bringing her mother's favorite foods, reading her the letters from women who had survived their own versions of the widow's feast. They were rare, these letters, but each one was a small victory. Each one meant the truth was spreading, slowly but surely, like dawn breaking over dark water. Folake died on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 7 years after Chief Adeyemi's burial. She went peacefully in her sleep, with Bisola holding her hand. The mission priest said prayers over her body, but Folake had left specific instructions. She wanted no traditional burial rites, no feasting, no ceremonies. Just a simple grave, far from Chief Adeyemi's compound. But on the night they buried her, something strange happened. Blue flames appeared above her grave, just for a moment, spelling out words in the old language. The priest couldn't read them, but an elderly woman who had come to pay respects whispered their meaning. The witness has spoken. The bound are free. Let no one dare bind them again. The flames faded, and Folake's grave settled into peaceful silence. In Lagos, Bisola woke from a dream, tears on her face but a smile on her lips. She had seen her mother in the dream, young again, walking through a field of tall grass. And beside her walked the cold-eyed spirit and all the others, no longer shadows but fully human, fully whole, finally and completely free. The widow's feast is gone now, buried with the women who made it and the women who suffered it. But Folake's testimony remains, a warning written in fire and memory. Some traditions deserve to die, some silences must be broken, and some feasts should never, ever be eaten. This is JourneyTales Africa, where we dig up the stories buried in our past. Subscribe to hear more tales that refuse to stay silent.